Guys, I never thought I'd be that woman, but literally the children in my street are still screaming and playing at 9 o'clock at night. Do you not have homes to go to? I mean, where's a good gingerbread house and an oven when you need one? Hey there guys, my name's Megan if you're new here, and if not, welcome back for another spooky episode of Killer Weekend, where each week we'll discuss a true crime case and you guys can feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments box below. Don't worry, I'm not Rocky Balboa and these aren't black eyes. I've simply been trying out a new makeup look, which I'm instantly regretting. If you like all things true crime, supernatural, UFO, conspiracy theory, and all that good stuff in between, then please hit that subscribe button. I'll be here for you each week with our true crime killer weekends, and on and off every couple of Wednesdays with our weirdo Wednesdays, where we'll discuss something spooky I've heard. If you'd further like to support this wee channel o' mine, then please feel free to visit www.patreon.com/Megan True Crime. I will leave a small disclaimer at the beginning of this episode. It does involve details of violent crime, sexual assault, and also arson. If that's a trigger point for you, then please feel free to turn away now. Before we dive into this week's episode, I would like to introduce this week's sponsor. It's the amazing HelloFresh. The time has come for me to kickstart my new routine of eating healthy, and that's why I've chosen HelloFresh to help me on my fitness journey. Fitness big bump into my wedding dress. In all seriousness though, HelloFresh's fit and wholesome recipes have made it super easy for me to make those healthy changes to my diet without compromising on flavour. My fiance and I have totally different work schedules, so it's really nice for us to take some time out and be able to cook together. And with HelloFresh, we're not sacrificing that special time by spending hours at the supermarket debating over what's for dinner tonight. With HelloFresh's carefully calculated portions, you're also cutting down 20% of your food waste compared to regular grocery shopping. Something else me and my fiance love to do is just to increase our regular orders by a couple of extra meals and then use the leftovers for lunch the next day. And trust me, with food this good, you'll be going back for seconds. With over 50 different recipes to choose from each week, HelloFresh gives us so many tasty options without ever having to step into an expensive restaurant. The new menu release on their site did not disappoint, and there's some incredible Mediterranean recipes that will literally have your mouth watering. I've been using HelloFresh for well over a year now, and it's not only given me back my confidence in the kitchen, but it's also given me that time to laugh and try new recipes with my fiance every day, despite our busy work schedules. But don't just take my word for it, try it out yourselves today. Go to hellofresh.com and use code MEGAN16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. That's hellofresh.com and use code MEGAN16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. Hello my wee gremlins, how are you? What have you been up to? If you follow me on Instagram, then you will probably know I had a fun-filled weekend last weekend. And yes, I may have been the embodiment of the phrase white girl wasted.
Who wants to go swimming? Oh, this song is about me!
Here I was, minding my own business. Me and my fiance were on a little night away, you know, keeping the spark alive. And I decided to post on my Instagram story saying, "Happy Friday, everyone." But it wasn't Friday, it was Saturday. Definitely not the most embarrassing thing I've done after a few Jaeger bombs, but that's a story for another day. So ladies and gentlebags, where's all my horror fans out there? Let me see. Also, please don't comment on the fact that my hands are white and my face is not. I've always been a fan of a good jump scare. I've watched pretty much every single horror film known to man, including the directorial shit stain that is known as Clownado. You heard me right. It's a tornado full of clowns. So, when a new horror-themed TV show was released in 2011, you can bet your bottom dollar that I would be watching it. Just out here wearing blue eyeshadow and quoting Annie now. Ryan Murphy, the creator of American Horror Story, took all the terror that you'd experience during a 90-minute movie, doubled it, and then spread it out over 10 seasons. Before American Horror Story, we could go to the cinema and watch a man slice and dice only to return to the safety of our own homes. But what this new TV show did was give people that same uneasy feeling, except this time you couldn't escape. Was that a noise upstairs? Why is my dog barking at that window? Is someone in my house? What made these terrifying tales that little bit more haunting was the fact that several of them came with a dreaded disclaimer. Based on true events. Yes, several of the episodes each week would take inspiration from true crimes such as the Columbine shootings, the Black Dahlia murder, and also the Chicago Massacre. On the TV show, this story was told behind the eyes of a couple of nurses who were murdered in their Los Angeles mansion. However, the true story was far more vicious and the body count much higher. This week's case will leave you reeling as you realise that sometimes fact is worse than fiction. Tonight, everyone, we will be discussing the Chicago Massacre, a true American horror story. Our tale today transports us to the swinging 60s, when instead of watching Temptation Island,
You marry me, baby, because I love you and I want you to be my baby for the rest of our lives and I want to die next to you.
everyone was listening to The Temptations. In 1966, the first Batman movie was released in cinemas, and let me tell you that the CGI was something special. In an era of peace, love, racial segregation, and some questionable hallucinogenic drugs, the horror genre was fairly new to the silver screen. Since the birth of the slasher flick Peeping Tom in the spring of 1960, American women now had something new to fear: serial killers. And unbeknownst to 8 Chicago nurses, those fears would soon become a reality as a twisted predator lay in wait outside of their middle-class townhouse. It was a balmy evening on Wednesday the 13th of July 1966, and the home at 2319 East 100th Street had been functioning as a dorm for student nurses. All under the age of 25, the 8 women who lived there had been studying nursing at the South Chicago Community Hospital. Some of them stayed home that night and others went out with their boyfriends, filling their evenings with laughter and fond memories. But all of this would come to an end with just one knock at a door. The women living there were all from different backgrounds, but they were connected by one main passion: nursing. 3 of the students, however, were very far from home, having travelled to the US from the Philippines. One of them, Merlita Gargulo, who'd been raised within a big family on the island of Mindoro. She would often take her younger siblings swimming at the river near her home, and her family said she had the most beautiful singing voice. Merlita was shy, a bit more of an introvert. She was very quiet and would often just focus on her studies so that she could eventually travel somewhere where she'd have more opportunity. She worked her wee bum off and was accepted into Arellano University, which was situated in Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines. After her graduation, Merlita boarded a flight to Chicago to further her education, and whilst en route, she met another girl travelling to Chicago to study nursing, and her name was Corazon Atienza. 23-year-old Corazon, nicknamed Cora for short, had also grown up in the Philippines in the small province of Batangas. She came from a large family of 8 children. Ouch. And she made sure that she learned English at a very young age, as she knew being bilingual could offer her more opportunities later in life. A tough and streetwise young woman, after she graduated from Far Eastern University, Cora was extremely proud of herself for being accepted into a nursing program in Chicago. Much like most Filipina women who worked overseas, Merlita and Cora would send money to their homes back in the Philippines, and this is something they weren't alone in. Another woman, Valentina Pasion, would also send the bulk of her wages back home to her mum. 23-year-old Valentina, nicknamed Tina by family and friends, had grown up in a tiny town called Jones, hours away from their nearest city, so Chicago would be a big step for her. As a teenager, Valentina was constantly cooking for the family in order to give her mum a little break. She was known to be an exceptional cook. Her speciality dish was said to be pasite, which is a mixture of pork, noodles and vegetables. After moving to Chicago, it was said that Valentina would make this meal for her other roommates just to give them a little bit of a taste of home. In the few months that Tina was in Chicago, she would experience bouts of homesickness. She missed the warm weather in Jones, which was a far cry from some of the bitter evenings she would experience in the US. Upon their arrival in America, the three women were welcomed with a big surprise party. They were said to have kept themselves to themselves and found comfort in each other, and another student called Louisa Silverio, who only lived a couple of blocks down from the townhouse. Louisa was also from the Philippines and would often spend her evenings coming over and painting her nails with the other girls. The eldest of the group, and also Mama Bear, 24-year-old Nina Jo Schmale, was an Elvis lover, but she was a little bit of a late bloomer in life and took some time to realise what her true passion was. After finishing up at Glenbarb Township High School in Illinois, like most teenagers, Nina Jo felt a little bit lost. She worked as a receptionist for a while, but decided that that wasn't the right path for her. At the age of 19, Nina Jo took up a volunteer position within an elderly care home named The Poor Farm. Not quite sure what to make of that, but moving on. It was whilst she worked here that she realised she was a natural carer. She wanted to be a nurse. Nina Jo had grown up in a working class family alongside her only brother John, and her father absolutely doted on his only daughter, even purchasing her a very beautiful 1957 Chevy Bel Air convertible. She didn't have much, but she did have a sweet ride and also a sweet looking fiance. But in 1966, there were strict restrictions on exactly what student nurses were allowed to do with their lives. They weren't allowed to be married, have children, get pregnant, wear jewellery, or makeup. How dare you try and educate yourself? If you're a wife and mother, your life should be fulfilled enough. You don't need to learn. Your happiness is here in the kitchen. But she wasn't the only one holding out. 21-year-old Suzanne Faris was also planning a summer wedding in 1967. Given the nickname Susie by her sister Marilyn and brother John, the young woman was raised in Cape Cod in Massachusetts. After reading a wee bit about the Faris family, I found something so cute. Her mum and dad had the nicest love story. So her dad, he was dedicated to joining the priesthood until a little woman named Mary moved in down the street. And well, the minute he saw Mary, he realised the celibate life was not for him, and the two were married. The family lived a modest lifestyle, but everyone would say they were the happiest family in town, with Susie being an amazing sister to her brother John Jr. She would even teach him how to make French onion soup with kind of a cheat. It was sour cream with dry onion soup sachet. Her father loved her dearly and even gave her the nickname of Cookie out of affection. But despite having the most amazing good looks and the best fashion sense, like Nina Jo Schmale, Susie struggled to figure out what she was going to do with her life. Whilst attending Aquinas High School, Susie would put her creativity to good use and make herself these unique outfits. Just because she wasn't one of the richest girls in school didn't mean she couldn't keep up with trends. Many would say that her kind and loving nature was like a magnet that drew people towards her. On one occasion during prom season, a girl in her class couldn't afford a big fancy prom dress, so Susie made her one. Eventually, she was accepted into nursing school in Chicago and off she went. But it would appear that this move was written in the stars, as shortly after moving to Chicago, she met a young man named Phil Jordan through one of her other colleagues, Mary Ann Jordan. Phil was extremely successful. He owned his own boat. I mean, that's a catch right there. No pun intended. He even took Susie's younger brother, John Jr., under his wing and treated him like a sibling of his own. So when in 1966 Phil proposed and Susie said yes, the families could not have been more thrilled. 20-year-old Mary Ann Jordan, Phil's sister, could not have been more excited for her big brother's upcoming nuptials. She was all about family. Her younger brother Billy had been born with Down syndrome, and it was said that the two had a strange, almost telepathic bond between them. Billy and Mary Ann could communicate with just a look or a laugh, which her family said that Billy had completely copied Mary Ann's laugh. So when he laughed, she laughed, and it sounded like the same person. Her summers would be spent roller skating, playing baseball, and taking her younger brother Billy to the beach so that he could dip his toes in the sand and play in the sea. Always a caring girl by nature, Mary Ann Jordan had grown up with the dream of becoming a nurse. She had listened to countless stories about her ancestor, Gracie Jordan. Gracie Jordan was a senior surgical nurse in the early 1900s for the University of Michigan. This would have been a rare career opportunity for a woman in the 1900s. Let's bear in mind that the only job women had then started with a B and ended in a J. So when Mary Ann finally enrolled in nursing school, she felt like she was reaching her goals. It was during her first week at university that she met Susie Farris, and the two were instantly friends. She loved Susie so much that she even introduced her to her older brother Phil. It was a match made in heaven. Sparks were flying everywhere. So when the two got engaged, of course Susie asked Mary Ann to be her bridesmaid. Unlike most of the other girls who were outgoing and found socialisation easy, 20-year-old Pamela Lee Wilkening was a little bit different. She was a quiet and serious young girl who spent most of her years in Lansing, Michigan, studying for tests. A good girl at heart, Pam would spend most of her evenings at the Girl Scouts, or she would spend time watching football and basketball games with her friends. She loved to watch the sports, but it was said that she absolutely hated playing sports, which, same. Her only brother, Jack, made jokes that with her stern demeanour, she could have easily been a military nurse. The two were very different, but they got along really well, and often Pam would watch him race cars on the weekend. Another resident of 2319 East 100th Street, who appeared to have been born with a nurturing gene, was Patricia Ann Matusek, who was born in 1945 in Chicago to her Czechoslovakian parents. Many of Patricia's friends recalled growing up just down the street from her father Joe's tavern, and it would seem like they had an absolute blast. In the summer, they would sunbathe on the roof of an old funeral home, and then in the winter, they would pull their sleds up and down the streets of Chicago. Their weekends were filled with trips to the drive-in movie theatre, in which they would stuff their faces with popcorn and also put in these huge rollers into their hair so that they had that extra 60s bounce. A funny story I actually read whilst researching this case was on one occasion the girls had driven far from home, about 40 miles, to get to this drive-through movie theatre. But when they arrived, it wasn't there. They were completely lost. All the girls had already put their rollers in, so they refused to go to a gas station to ask for directions and literally drove around for hours, completely in the dark. But despite many happy times, Patricia also experienced her fair share of tragedy when, at the age of 14, her 15-year-old cousin Tommy was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Every day after school, she would travel to the hospital, fluff his pillows, and make sure he had something to drink. And it was during this time that she realised she was born to be a nurse. When you think of 8 women living in a townhouse, sounds really fun, right? Yeah, but it also has its drawbacks. I mean, think about the mess. You had rollers, dresses, makeup everywhere, and it was quite easy to lose your school books and also your footing. So that's exactly why when 22-year-old Gloria Davy moved in, she decided to give her little sister a job of cleaning the apartment. And this meant that her little sister could make a little bit of extra money and also that the girls could see the carpet. Gloria was used to a house full of females, having been raised by her former Marine father alongside her 4 sisters and 1 brother. Her father, Charles, was said to be extremely tough on the girls and expected just as much from them as he did from his own son. So, when she was named president of the Student Nursing Association in 1965, he couldn't have been prouder. Recently, Gloria had also accepted a marriage proposal from her boyfriend Richard. So like the other girls who were engaged, she couldn't wait until graduation when they could begin their lives together. It was just one house, but it was filled with so many hopes for the future, so many nights of eating junk food and talking about boyfriends back home in different cultures. But tragically, on the 13th of July 1966, all of that would be wiped out in one wave of violence. All of the girls decided to do their own thing that night. Merlita, Valentina, and Cora had all been working a 7-hour shift at the local hospital, so they decided just to stay in and chill. They also invited their friend Luisa Silverio along for a night of manicures and dinner. As the sun set, the girls persuaded Luisa to stay for a sleepover, and she decided to walk the 2 blocks to her apartment to grab her toothbrush and her pajamas. But when she arrived home, she realised she had received letters from her boyfriend and her family back home. She had recently been slacking a little bit on her letter writing and thought that she could probably spend a night writing back home instead of going to her friend's house. So she cancelled, a decision that would haunt her forever. At 11 p.m. that night, only 6 of the girls were home. You had Marlita, Valentina, and Cora, and then Pamela, Patricia, and Nina Jo. Gloria and Susie had made plans with their fiancés, and Mary Ann was at her parents' house only a few blocks away. As most of the women drifted off to sleep, a creeper broke in through the downstairs window. Armed with a pistol and a hunting knife, the skinny dude with a pockmarked face made his way slowly up the stairs towards the bedroom of Cora and Merlita. Knock, knock, knock. A sleepy Cora answered the door, only to then be ambushed by a man. The 2 women in the chaos were ushered into the bedroom next door, which slept Nina Jo, Patricia, Pamela, and Valentina. In the commotion, Cora, Merlita, and Valentina managed to escape into a closet, and they were holding the door shut. But within a few minutes, they heard a female's voice, an American voice, saying that it was safe to come out and that this man meant them no harm. Whoever was on the other side of that door seemed convinced that the intruder was only there to rob the women and then leave. So, trusting the instincts of their roommate, the 3 girls opened the closet door. But sadly, she was sorely mistaken. The 6 women were gathered in a bedroom as one by one they were tied up using torn rags. Corazon Atienza looked on in disbelief as this guy sat on her bedroom floor explaining why he needed the money to escape America. But something wasn't right. Cora could tell that this was some sort of sick manipulation tactic. He was trying to gain their trust. But why? Looking around, Cora could see that there was 6 of them and 1 of him. If they really wanted to, they could overpower him. But no, the American girls said that they didn't want to anger him for no reason, as they were sure he would just take their money and leave. I think that being nurses, the girls were just naturally nurturing and wanted to believe the best in everyone. But unfortunately, this was one person who really didn't deserve the benefit of the doubt. One by one, the man would lead the women out of the bedroom and return alone. Each of the women would walk out of the room calmly with the intruder, but the minute the bedroom door was closed, their soft sobs and pleas for help could be heard. Meanwhile, Susie Farris, who was out with her fiancé Phil, they decided to stop by his parents' house where Mary Ann Jordan was staying. Whilst the girls were chatting, Susie had invited Mary Ann to come over for an impromptu sleepover. It was quite late and Mary Ann wasn't too keen, but Susie convinced her with the idea of cocktails and wedding planning chat. So at 12:15 a.m, Phil dropped off his sister and his fiancé at number 2319, having absolutely no idea that he was handing the 2 women he loved most directly to their killer. Susie and Mary Ann entered the home and began walking up the stairs. But they weren't alone. Having heard Phil's car, the intruder was waiting for them. Ambushed by this cold-blooded monster, both women were caught completely off guard and they were stabbed to death in the stairway. But this wasn't his first kill of the evening. Gloria Davy, who had been out with her fiancé, had arrived earlier in the evening at 11 p.m. As soon as the door closed behind her, she was grabbed by a stranger and led into the living room, where she was then stripped, bound, beaten and sexually assaulted before she was strangled. All the while, the 6 women upstairs cowered in fear as they were picked off one by one, with the killer leaving in the early hours of the morning after fulfilling his twisted fantasies. But in the chaos of it all, he hadn't realised that someone had escaped. 23-year-old Cora Atienza had thought all along that this intruder had sinister motives. So, whilst his back was turned and he walked to lead another one of her colleagues into the bedroom, she tucked herself down and rolled under one of the beds. Her plan miraculously worked, and the young killer, with the confusion of the 3 girls who had entered the home, had miscounted his victims and left one survivor. I can't imagine the thoughts that must have been going through that poor girl's mind and how terrified she must have been while she was curled up in a ball under a bed listening to her friends be murdered. At 6 a.m. that morning, Cora escaped to a nearby window where she called out for help. This was the first massacre Chicago had seen in the 20th century. 8 women, respected women, had been picked off one by one in their middle-class neighbourhood. But why? Who would want to target a group of women who only dedicated their lives to helping others? Luckily for law enforcement, Cora had gotten a good look at the attacker, and from that, a detailed description emerged. He was described as being a white male, aged between 20 and 30. He had an acne-scarred face, but what stood out the most was his questionable ink. A black handwritten tattoo which said, "Born to raise hell. The description appeared in every Chicago newspaper, and all of a sudden, everyone was on the lookout for this killer. On July 16th, 1966, Chicago PD finally got the break in the case they had been looking for, when an employee of the Cook County Hospital got in touch to say that a man matching this description had just been admitted. The 24-year-old suspect had severe cuts on both wrists, and on his forearm he had a distinctive tattoo which said, "Born to raise hell." The man had allegedly tried to commit suicide in a $1-a-night motel. He was soon arrested and named to the public as Richard Speck. The more law enforcement looked into this character, the more they realised that he had a very concerning rap sheet. Richard Speck, born on the 6th of December in 1941, was raised in a highly religious household. He had an amazing relationship with his father and would even go out fishing every weekend with him. His parents were happy and took amazing care of their 5 daughters and 4 sons, but unfortunately at the age of 6, everything that could go wrong went wrong for Richard. His father died of a massive heart attack in his early 50s, and with that, the best part of Richard died too. Richard was especially devastated by this, even more so when his mum quickly remarried, but his stepdaddy was no saint. Despite his mum's strict no alcohol rule in the Speck household, his stepfather was a raging alcoholic, and when he got on the booze, he would lash out. Things only got worse when the family relocated to Dallas, Texas, moving away from their family and friends in Illinois. His mother was isolated and the abuse only intensified. Richard was bullied mercilessly at school because of his acne, and he actually used to not wear his glasses on purpose because he didn't want to give the bullies one more thing to victimize him for. At a young age, Richard began drinking himself and even blamed his mother for the abuse that he experienced at the hands of his stepfather. In 1962, a 20-year-old Richard began grooming a 15-year-old Shirley Malone, and within 2 months, she was pregnant with a baby girl, a little girl who was born named Bobby Lynn. Richard would marry his child bride eventually, but fatherhood would not change his manipulative and cruel ways. His wife said that he would sexually assault her around 4 to 5 times a day at knife point. Keeping up with his usual life of petty crime, in 1963 Richard was arrested for check fraud and theft, but he was soon paroled in 1965. However, within 4 weeks he was then arrested again through aggravated assault. This was the first time in his criminal career that we see a real violent streak to his attacks. He attacked a young woman at knife point in a car park. He was sentenced to 16 months in prison, but due to a clerical error, he was released within 6 months. During this latest stint in jail, he got a handcrafted tattoo on his forearm, which, you guessed it, said "Born to Raise Hell." His wife, Shirley Malone, heard about this tattoo and the attack on the woman in the car park and decided that enough was enough. His behaviour was only getting worse, and she divorced Richard and moved away with their young daughter. A few weeks later, Richard would then move to Chicago to live with his sister, but the real reason behind this is the fact that he was trying to avoid being interviewed for a burglary that had happened a few weeks prior. His family time would soon be cut short, and in 1966 he would finally act on his sick sexual fantasies. He would sexually assault and rob a 65-year-old woman in her own home for a measly $2.50. Only 14 days after this savage attack, a young woman named Mary Kay Pierce, who worked at a bar that Richard would frequent, was found dead, beaten to death in the alleyway behind the tavern. Richard was a prime suspect for this murder. However, he managed to escape his interview again by leaving to join the US Merchant Marines. Why do they always join the army. In those few weeks, a new woman would mysteriously turn up dead on those stops that Richard's crew made. In fact, in Indiana, he was wanted for questioning in the murders of 3 women. That wasn't all though. In Michigan, 4 females aged between 7 and 60 were found murdered, all with connections to Richard Speck. But yet again, he evaded law enforcement by changing his career and his location. Shortly after women's bodies began turning up, he was let go from the Marines. He soon got a job on another vessel, but when he turned up to start work that day, he was told that sadly he would have to go home. Someone else with more experience had taken the position. Rejected, unemployed, and blaming everyone but himself, he went on a bender. He began drinking in the early afternoon, and on the 13th of July 1966, he walked into a bar, which is where he met 53-year-old Ella Hooper. Ella was then led to Richard's motel room, where he attacked her at knife point, sexually assaulted her, and stole her firearm from her purse. And with that, he was on the lookout for his next victim. At Cook County Hospital, Richard was then apprehended and arrested for the murders of the 8 women. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he pled not guilty. But law enforcement had a bloody fingerprint of his at the scene, and they also had their star witness, Corazon Atienza, who had seen the whole thing. Right there in the courtroom, many wondered if she'd be too traumatized to face the killer. But there she was, standing proud as she looked him directly in the eye, pointed at him, and said, This is the man. And with those words, Richard Speck's reign of terror was finally over. After only 49 minutes, the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all 8 counts of murder. The judge sentenced Richard to death, but sadly he would never see his day in the electric chair. His sentence would actually be commuted to life in prison when it was exposed that during jury selection, jury members who were opposed to the death penalty were intentionally sent home. He would never again walk the streets, but for those who were affected by the crimes Richard committed, his shadow would follow them around forever. So many people lost loved ones that night. Take Philip Jordan Jr., for example. He lost his sister and the love of his life. I mean, how do you even come back from a grief like that? The evening that Mary Ann Jordan died, her little brother Billy, who had been cared for by Mary Ann his whole life, out of nowhere woke up and screamed, "She's dead. Mary Ann is dead," when no one knew that she had passed away. Everyone always said they had a special bond, and it's almost as if he could feel his sister being ripped away from him. As for the lone survivor of the Chicago Massacre, Corazon Atienza suffers from PTSD and night terrors, some of her nightmares putting her back under that bed all those years ago, and for a split second before she wakes up, it's as if she never escaped. The man, beast, whatever you want to call him, passed away on the 5th of December 1991 after suffering from a heart attack. But it would seem that his ghost would live on when in 1996 a video was released which was filmed in 1988 inside his prison cell, in which he talks about the murders, laughing and joking whilst performing sex acts on other prisoners. When one of the prisoners asks him why he did this and did he feel guilty, he says that no, he doesn't feel guilty, and in regards to his victims, it just wasn't their night. In this episode, I wanted to show that behind the movie deals and the TV shows, there was a story, a real story, one that mattered, about 8 nurses who were just living their lives, planning weddings and writing letters to their family and friends that would forever remain unfinished. So please, let's remember them and not the monster who turned their American dream into an American horror story. I hope you guys enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. For me, it really helps my channel. If you were watching for the first time and you thought, the blue eyeshadow's a bit much, but I can overlook that, then please hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming episodes. I want to say a huge thank you to you all who leave your kind messages every week and who've been supporting me since I started my wee channel a year and a half ago. It literally has flown in, and I know that's because of you guys. You make my job so much fun and I love you to pieces. So with that in mind, please be safe, lock your doors, don't talk to strangers, and never trust a man with a dodgy tattoo. See ya! Yeah! Oh, that wee high note was Mariah Carey worthy? No? Okay.